There was a street light outside my apartment that I could see from my bedroom window. It stood at the end of the road, near an old intersection where no cars ever seemed to pass anymore. Every night, it flickered a few times around midnight before glowing steady until dawn. It was ordinary in every sense until the night it didn't come back on. I noticed it because I had trouble sleeping that night. I was standing near the window, just staring at the quiet street when the light began to dim. I thought the bulb was just finally burning out. The light faded to a faint yellow glow before disappearing entirely, leaving the corner in complete darkness. I waited for it to flicker back to life, but it didn't. The strange thing was that everything else on the street stayed perfectly lit. Only that one street light went dark as if it had been singled out. I watched for a few more minutes before deciding it wasn't worth worrying about. But as I turned away, I caught something in the corner of my eye. The darkness under the dead light didn't look right. It wasn't just a shadow. It looked heavier, denser, like the blackness there had depth to it. I told myself it was just my imagination and finally went to bed. The next morning I checked again. The streetlight was still off, but when I looked closer, I noticed something odd. The pole wasn't there anymore. The base was there, the metal bolts still sticking out of the concrete, but the pole itself was gone, as if it had been cleanly lifted out of the ground. I went outside to see for myself, thinking maybe the city had removed it overnight, but there were no tire tracks, no signs of work, nothing disturbed. Just a perfectly circular patch of dust where the pole used to stand. The neighbors didn't seem to care. I asked a few of them if they'd seen anything, but most just shrugged. One old man who lived across the street said there hadn't been a light there for years. When I pointed at the empty base, he frowned as if confused and went back inside without another word. That night, I waited by the window again. The street looked the same, but something about it felt wrong. The air outside that corner seemed to shimmer like heat, even though the night was cold. I stared at the empty space where the light used to be and felt a strange pull, like I should walk down there just to see. I resisted the urge, but couldn't bring myself to look away. Then the flickering started again. Only this time, there was no light to flicker. The darkness itself pulsed faintly every few seconds, as though something beneath it was trying to force its way through. I stepped back from the glass and felt a chill rise up the back of my neck. The shadow under that space stretched slightly across the road and then snapped back like it was alive. I closed the curtains, but couldn't stop listening. For hours I thought I could hear something faint coming from that direction. Not voices exactly, but movement like footsteps too slow to be human, dragging slightly with each step. It grew louder until it sounded like it was right outside my window. When I finally looked, the street was empty, but the reflection in the glass was wrong, and I could still see the old streetlight standing exactly where it used to be, glowing faintly, even though the space outside was dark. The next morning, I checked again. The pole was still gone, the bolts still clean, but someone had left footprints near the base pressed deep into the dust. Bara footprints leading toward my building. I didn't sleep the night after finding those footprints. They stayed in my mind like a stain I couldn't wash out. I told myself it had to be kids, or maybe someone messing around late at night, but there was something about those prints that wouldn't leave me alone. They weren't spaced like walking prints. They were close together, slightly turned inward, as if whoever made them had been standing there for a long time watching. When I went back out the next morning, the footprints were still there, but they had changed. The dust had hardened from the night, yet the prints looked deeper, almost fresh, as though someone had stood in the same place again after I went to bed. But what unsettled me most was their direction. They didn't face toward my building anymore. They faced away from it toward the middle of the road, as if the person or thing that had left them had turned around before vanishing. I try not to think about it as I left for work, but the image of that empty space where the streetlight used to be stayed in my head all day. When I came home that evening, I felt it before I saw it, the strange weight in the air that seemed to gather around that corner. It was like the atmosphere itself thickened there, making sound dull and movement slower. That night the street was quiet as usual. I sat by the window again, though I told myself I wouldn't. I didn't want to feed the fear, but curiosity has a way of breaking through reason. Midnight came, and the darkness beneath the missing streetlight seemed even heavier than before. I waited for the faint pulse like the night before, but nothing moved. For a long time it was still. Then I noticed something new. Across the road, one of the other streetlights flickered briefly and dimmed before stabilizing again. Then the next one did the same. Each light along the street began to shudder one by one, as if something invisible was passing beneath them. The flickering stopped before reaching my side of the street. Then silence again. I didn't move for nearly an hour. Finally, I convinced myself it was nothing, maybe a wiring issue. But when I finally pulled the curtain closed, I noticed something strange on the glass. There was a faint outline like a handprint smeared across the inside of the window. It wasn't mine. It was smaller, longer fingers stretched unnaturally far, as if whoever made it had pressed hard enough to leave a trace of heat behind. The glass felt slightly warm when I touched it. I didn't open the window again after that. Over the next few nights, I started hearing things. At first, it was soft noises coming from outside the building, like quiet footsteps moving slowly along the road. They would stop directly below my window and stay there for several minutes before moving away. Sometimes I heard a faint tapping on the wall near the window frame, soft enough to doubt, but rhythmic enough to notice. I tried sleeping in the living room one night just to escape it. But even from there I could still sense it. The heaviness seemed to fill the apartment no matter where I went. At exactly midnight the air would grow still and the faint hum of the city would disappear. The silence was so complete it made me dizzy. Then, just as before, I would hear it again. Slow, careful footsteps moving down the street, stopping where the vanished streetlight had once stood. I don't know why I kept looking, but I did. That night, when I peered through the smallest crack in the curtain, I saw the space under the missing light clearly for the first time. There was no shadow now, no pulsing darkness, just emptiness. And then in that emptiness, something began to take shape. At first, it looked like heat distortion, a faint ripple in the air that gathered form the longer I stared. Slowly, it began to resemble the shape of a person, tall and still standing exactly where the streetlight should have been. There was no face, only the outline and the sense of something wrong with the proportions too thin, too long. The shape tilted its head slightly, as if aware of being watched. I dropped the curtain and backed away, but before I could turn, the light flickered in my apartment and went out. The power returned a moment later, but the clock on the wall had stopped at exactly midnight. I didn't look outside again that night, but in the morning the footprints were back at the base of the missing streetlight. This time they were facing my window again. I stopped opening my curtains after that night, but it didn't matter. Even without looking, I could feel that empty space across the street. It was like the air in my apartment tilted slightly toward it, drawing everything in that direction, sound, warmth, even thought. Every night at midnight, the same thick silence settled. It was different from ordinary quiet. It felt alive, like the air was listening. I try to act normal during the day. I went to work, forced conversations, pretended to sleep. But small things began to follow me. At work, reflections in the glass of my office door seemed darker than the room itself, as if something was standing just behind me. My coworkers didn't notice anything strange, but I started to see faint smudges on surfaces, long, narrow handprints that looked too stretched to belong to anyone human. That week, I began hearing the dripping sound. At first, it came from the ceiling like water leaking through plaster, but when I checked, there was nothing. The ceiling was dry, the walls were dry, yet the noise persisted, slow, deliberate drops landing somewhere inside the walls themselves. That night, I lay in bed and listened to it echo through the apartment. Then, right after the clock hit midnight, the dripping stopped, and the sound of footsteps replaced it, faint at first, then louder, moving along the road outside. I counted each step as it came closer, steady and slow. When it stopped, I knew exactly where it had halted, right beneath where the missing streetlight used to stand. I don't know what made me do it, but I opened the curtain just a crack. The space across the street looked darker than the rest of the night. But this time, it wasn't empty. There was something faintly visible like smoke, dense but formless. As I watched, the shadows seemed to shift, folding and unfolding in slow motion. And then, for just a second, I thought I saw a face forming within it. It wasn't a normal face. The eyes were too high, too far apart. The mouth was stretched wide open as if frozen mid-breath. But what froze me wasn't its shape, it was that I recognized it. It looked like me. I stumbled back, tripping over a chair, and by the time I looked again, the shadow was gone. The road was empty. The other streetlights hummed faintly, and the night resumed its usual stillness. I closed the curtains tight, but I couldn't get the image out of my mind, that distorted reflection watching from the space where the light should be. The next morning, something new appeared. The maintenance man was out front cleaning the gutters when I saw him stop suddenly and call someone over. I went downstairs pretending to take out the trash. The footprints were back again, but not where they had been before. Now, they led across the road from the missing streetlight directly toward my building. They stopped at the edge of the sidewalk, right beneath my window. The maintenance man muttered something about kids and left, but I could see it clearly. The dust wasn't scuffed like from normal shoes. The edges were too clean, too sharp, as if pressed down by something heavier than a human step. And the pattern of the soles, it was wrong. There were no treads, no distinct marks, only smooth impressions. That night, the dripping sound came back, but now it was closer inside the walls right behind my bed. Every drop felt like it landed inside my skull. Around midnight, I moved to the living room to get away from it, but when I switched on the TV, the screen flickered with static. For a moment, I thought it had lost signal, but then I noticed the static wasn't random. It was forming shapes, outlines, faces, figures moving in the noise. And then, amid the shifting white and black, I saw the same figure I'd seen outside, tall, thin, and bent forward. It was standing under the vanished streetlight. I turned off the TV and sat in the dark, holding my breath. After a few minutes, I heard it 3 slow knocks. Not from the door, but from inside the wall. Each knock was softer than the one before, until it sounded like something breathing through the plaster. I moved closer, pressing my ear against the wall. I shouldn't have done that. I heard something faint, not quite a voice, but a whispering movement, as if someone was mouthing words directly against the other side of the wall. I couldn't make out what it was saying, but I understood the rhythm. It was counting. I stepped back, heart pounding. When I dared to look again toward the window, I saw the curtains move slightly, not from wind, but as though someone had brushed past from the outside. I didn't open them. I didn't need to, because even through the fabric I could see it. A long, thin shadow pressed against the curtain. The outline of a person standing perfectly still. It stayed there for the rest of the night. I did not sleep after that night. The shadow had stayed there for hours, motionless against the curtain, as though waiting for me to acknowledge it. When daylight came, the shape dissolved into ordinary sunlight, and I told myself I had imagined it. That fatigue had warped my vision, but the dust outside still bore those smooth footprints, and something about them made me sick to look at. They were deeper now, as though whatever made them had gained weight or form. I started avoiding my apartment after dark. I stayed at work late, walked around the city, sat in cafes that stayed open until dawn. But whenever I tried to rest, no matter where I went, I could still sense it, the direction of that missing streetlight pulling faintly at the edge of my thoughts. Sometimes in reflections, I'd see a faint smear of light behind me, like the glow of a bulb that wasn't really there. 3 days later, I convinced myself to go home during the day to collect a few things. The hallway leading to my apartment smelled different, heavy with something metallic. When I opened the door, the air inside felt wrong, colder than a corridor. My plants were wilted even though I'd watered them that morning before leaving for work. On the floor near the window was a small puddle of clear liquid. I thought maybe a pipe had burst again, but when I touched it, the water was warm body temperature. I stepped closer to the curtain and noticed tiny marks on the fabric, little depressions that looked like fingertips pressing from the outside in. I backed away and turned to leave, but before I reached the door, I heard the faint sound of electricity, a low hum that came from nowhere. The lights flickered once, and in that brief dimming, I saw it again reflected in the glass of a photo frame. A tall figure standing under the spot where the streetlight had once stood. The reflection lingered longer than it should have. I ran out of the apartment, down the stairs, out onto the street. It was noon and bright, but the air felt heavy as if the sun couldn't reach this block properly. I forced myself to look across the street. There was still nothing there, no pole, no wires, no hole in the asphalt. Just an empty square of pavement where the light should have been. Except now something new was there. A small object lay directly on that spot. It was a shard of glass, curved like a lens. When I crouched to look closer, I saw my own reflection in it, distorted and warped, eyes stretched wide. Then the shadow passed over the ground, not cast by me or any car or cloud. It just appeared, tall and narrow, stretching from the empty spot toward my feet. I stepped back, but the shadow followed, sliding across the asphalt like it was chasing my movement. It stopped only when I reached my building's door, and when I looked down, the shape had changed. It was my own silhouette now, but bent forward as though leaning over me. That night, I stayed with a co-worker who lived miles away. I didn't tell him the truth. I said my building had electrical issues. He let me crash on his couch. But around midnight, as he snored from the other room, I woke to a faint glow filtering through the blinds. It looked exactly like a streetlight, the same pale yellow hue. When I peered through the slats, my stomach clenched. There was no lamppost outside this window, just the dark alley of the neighboring building. The light came from a point suspended in the air about 10 feet off the ground. And beneath it, someone stood perfectly still. I pulled back, heart racing. I waited for the light to fade, but it stayed for hours until morning. By dawn, both the glow and the figure had vanished. My coworker said he hadn't noticed anything, but I could tell by the way he looked at me that he thought I was losing it. I didn't go back to my apartment again. I rented a cheap motel room near the outskirts of town, telling myself I'd break the pattern. I thought distance would mean safety. But on the second night, I woke to that same low hum, the sound of a bulb turning on. The room filled with dim yellow light, and the wall opposite the bed began to darken slowly, forming the outline of a man. He didn't move. He didn't speak, but the air in the room throbbed as though it was breathing. The longer I watched, the more I realized something horrifying. The wall wasn't changing. The light was bending around him, refusing to touch him. I turned on every light in the room. Nothing helped. My reflection in the mirror showed me standing alone, but when I looked directly at the wall, the figure was still there. Closer now. I ran outside barefoot into the freezing night. The parking lot lights flickered weakly, one by one, until only a single lamp remained. I stood under it, gasping for air. I looked down at the ground beneath me. The pavement was wet, but there had been no rain. In the puddle, my reflection looked wrong again. My eyes were hollow. My mouth was open as though whispering something I couldn't hear. And behind me, distorted in the rippling water, stood a second shape, a thin, dark outline reaching forward, almost touching my shoulder. When I turned around, the space behind me was empty. The next morning, I checked out of the motel and drove aimlessly for hours, trying to convince myself I was imagining everything. But every road I took, every detour I made, somehow looped me back toward the same block, the same street, the same missing light. By dusk, I was back where I started, and as night fell, the darkness swallowed the road again except for one spot, a faint yellow glow where the streetlight had once been. This time I didn't look away. I watched as something began to move within that glow, like a person stepping forward from a distance that didn't exist. The shadow stretched, taking shape, and slowly, impossibly, began to walk toward me. I remember thinking I could outrun it, that if I kept driving fast enough, the glow would fade behind me, lost among the other streetlights. But it never did. Even as I left the city and the highway grew empty, the yellow light followed me in the mirrors, always one pole behind, always just out of reach, pacing my speed like a reflection that refused to brake. I drove until the fuel gauge hit empty and the engine died on a stretch of rural road I didn't recognize. The night was silent except for the ticking of cooling metal. No houses, no signs, just darkness, the kind that felt alive. I sat there gripping the wheel, trying to steady my breath. Then, in the corner of my vision, the light appeared again. One solitary glow floating in the distance. I didn't want to go near it, but staying still felt worse. So I stepped out, the gravel crunching under my shoes sounding deafening in the quiet. As I walked toward the glow, the air grew colder. The closer I got, the more I realized it wasn't fixed to anything. No pole, no wires, no bulb. It just hung there in the air like the idea of a streetlight, humming faintly. Beneath it, something glimmered on the ground. A car key. My car key. Except mine was still in my hand. When I looked up, The figure was standing beneath the floating light. I could make out its outline this time. Too tall, limbs slightly wrong, head tilted as though curious. Its surface reflected light, but not like skin, more like water, its edges rippling even though there was no wind. It began to step forward. Every movement it made caused the light above it to pulse brighter, almost like it was feeding off it. I wanted to run, but every direction looked the same, the darkness pressing in from all sides. So I backed away slowly, my heartbeat loud in my chest. Then I heard footsteps, not mine, wet dragging close. I turned and saw another light ignite further down the road. Then another. Each one came alive with a low hum, illuminating nothing except the empty ground beneath. But as the lights flickered on, I realized they formed a trail, each glow marking a single step, leading directly toward me. I started running. The road seemed endless. The air grew heavier with each breath, and the hum deepened until it felt like it was vibrating inside my chest. I could feel something behind me, moving faster than I could, its steps perfectly timed with my heartbeat. When I looked back, I saw the row of lights bending, as if something enormous and invisible was pushing through them. The bulbs flickered violently, some bursting in showers of sparks. The last one before me exploded, plunging everything into total darkness. And then silence. For a long time, I didn't move. The road felt different beneath my feet, softer, colder. When I finally reached for my phone to turn on the flashlight, the screen didn't respond. It glowed briefly, and in that pale reflection, I saw something that froze me completely. My own face, staring back, but with the same faint yellow tint as the light. My eyes shimmered like glass. The hum started again, not from the distance this time, but inside my ears, like a vibration in my skull. My vision blurred, and the darkness began to pulse with light. The next thing I knew, I was standing in front of my apartment building. Morning had come. The city moved as though nothing had happened. For a week, I tried to believe I'd dreamt it all. But each night, when I looked out the window, that same spot across the street glowed faintly for a moment, then vanished. Once I thought I saw a figure standing there again, hand raised as though waving. Then came the night when the light appeared directly outside my window. It didn't glow from above anymore. It shone through the glass, pale and patient. When I turned off all the lights in the apartment, it still burned in the dark. And when I pressed my ear to the wall, I could hear it breathing. Now I hear the hum all the time. In the refrigerator, in the pipes, in the silence between heartbeats. Sometimes, late at night, I feel the faint vibration under the floorboards like footsteps pacing back and forth, waiting for me to move. I don't leave my apartment anymore. I don't go near the window, but I can see the light through the cracks of the blinds. It flickers softly, like it's waiting for me to look. And sometimes, when I can't sleep, I swear I hear the front door click. The hum gets louder. I feel a warmth behind me, like someone standing too close. I know if I turn around, I'll see it standing there, tall, patient, bathed in that impossible yellow glow. I think it's waiting for me to follow it back to the place where the road ends, where the light never goes out.